subscribing to the channel. I post 2 times a week, on Monday and Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. I recommend using headphones if you would like to hear the gentle mic brushing. Now let's get right into tonight's case. This is a case that has become extremely popular in the media, and I'm not quite sure exactly why right now. I understand that it's popular in general because it is a fascinating case. No disrespect whatsoever to the victim and the loved ones of the victim, but the case in general is very, very interesting. This is the case of Candy Montgomery. Most recently, in May, this month right now, of 2022, Hulu released a miniseries on the case. Sometime later this year, HBO will have their own version of the same case. And in 1990, there was a TV, made-for-TV movie on the same case that was based on a book that was written on the case. So you get my point. And if you haven't heard the case yet, let me go ahead and get started. So, this case takes place on June 13th, Friday the 13th, 1980, in a town called Wiley, Texas. That is a suburb of Dallas. And it was a nice little friendly town with a lot of church-going people, people who knew each other, a family type of community. Let's go ahead and learn about Betty Gore. So Betty was born in 1950 in Norwich, Kansas. She had 2 brothers and 2 parents. She was known to be a pretty girl. She had an innocent Montgomery family. So let's just take a step back and find out a little more about the Montgomerys. So Candy Montgomery, her real name being Candace, she was born in 1951 in Texas. Her father was in the army, and they moved around a lot. So she got pretty good at making friends in each place. She was very outgoing and sociable. And it was said that she was the kind of girl who got what she wanted. When she finished high school, she moved out on her own and started working as a secretary. But she dreamed of a life of being a full-time wife and mother, and she was looking for a man who could provide her with a comfortable lifestyle. So she dated a bit, but when she met Pat Montgomery, he seemed to be the one for her. Not because he was perfect, because he wasn't. He was kind of introverted and not as good looking as what she wanted, but she felt that he had potential for making a good living. So they married. In 1977, they moved to Wiley, Texas. He was working for Texas Instruments as an electrical engineer, and he was making good money. He was making $70,000, which was quite a bit in the mid to late 70s. So they had a pretty nice house and a very nice lifestyle. But Candy found their marriage to be really boring, and she didn't feel any spark or any fireworks. That's what she wanted, fireworks. She didn't have that with him, but she dreamed that it was out there, and she still wanted to find it. Now, as I mentioned before, the Montgomerys and the Gores met at church, and Betty and Candy and she was trying to get Alan's attention and his interest back. And they had began going to what was called marriage encounter groups, which was like a support group kind of thing to help couples get the life back into their marriages. And it was sort of working, so their marriage was improving. And one day, Alan told Candy that he wanted to stop the affair because he was working on his marriage. And she was like, that's fine, because in truth, this affair wasn't all that she hoped it would be. He wasn't really that much more interesting than her husband, in truth. And there wasn't that spark, and she didn't find him to be particularly great in bed. She was actually looking for something else. So they agreed to go their separate ways, and that was that. Nobody seemed to be particularly insulted or upset. And she actually went on to find a new man for an affair. Now, Candy and Pat also had 2 children, a boy and a girl, Ian and Jenny. Now, Jenny was friends with Elisa. They were the same age. Elisa, if you remember, was Betty Gore's daughter. So Candy's daughter and Betty's daughter, they were friends. And they had a sleepover at Candy's house one night in June of 1980. And they went to see The Empire Strikes Back, which had just come out. They went to the drive-in. And then they got to talking, and Elisa wanted to sleep over for another night at the Montgomery house. And she wanted to go swimming with them the next day. The next day would be June 13th, Friday the 13th. So, Candy called up Betty and said, is it okay if your daughter spends another night and we're gonna go swimming? I'm gonna need to get her bathing suit. And Betty said, that's fine. You can come get the bathing suit tomorrow morning, and also I'll give you some peppermints. This is brought up every time. It doesn't seem super significant, but peppermints. She always gave her daughter a peppermint as a prize for putting her head underwater. So the next day, Candy took the kids to church for some kind of services or schooling of some kind. It wasn't Sunday, so some kind of church activity. And she left to go run some errands as well as to go pick up the swimsuit. Now, that morning, Alan Gore left for a business trip to Minnesota. And Betty was not happy about it because she was lonely when he left and she didn't want him to leave. She had a baby that was like around 1 year old, and it was rough for her always being alone. He did travel a lot for business, but nonetheless he went. So around 10 in the morning, Candy showed up at Betty's house. She got the swimsuit, did her errands, went back to church, took the girls swimming, and went on with her day. see how she was, because she was, upset when he left. And she was suggesting that maybe she was pregnant again. But nobody answered the phone. So he kept trying throughout the day, and it was odd because she didn't tend to go out much. And even so, he would have thought she would be home. So after a while, he called his neighbor and asked the neighbor to go across the street and check it out. And her car was in the driveway, so why wasn't she answering the phone? And he had called a few neighbors, so it turned out like 3 different neighbors showed up at the house to check it out. And turned out the front door was not locked, so they walked right in. And it's nighttime now. And they faintly heard the baby crying. So somebody went to the baby's room and got her. Then they spotted the bathroom. There was blood in the bathroom. So that seemed pretty suspicious, to say the least. And they're calling out for Betty, and they don't hear any response. So, meanwhile, one of the guys took the baby out of the house and took the baby back to his own house to take care of her. She was okay, but she had just been crying all day and left unattended. So finally, one of these neighbors opens up the door to what's called the utility room. It's like a room that comes before the garage. I believe it's where they have like the laundry machine maybe, and like an extra freezer, that kind of thing. And they saw her there, laying on the ground in a pool of blood. And her face was so badly affected, let's say. They couldn't even make out her face, but they thought she had been shot. It turns out she hadn't been shot, though. Upon closer inspection, she had been the victim of an axe attack. That's right, axe. An axe. So, obviously, they called the police, who came there to check it out, and they had to call and tell Alan Gore what had happened. Oh, they didn't have to call him, he actually called the house. Because he kept calling and calling. He was still calling the number. So one of the times when he called, they picked it up and said, "Hey, we've got terrible news. Your wife's been shot." So he, of course, headed right home. And he did call, and he told Candy what had happened, and she was very upset when she heard the news, and she agreed to keep the daughter, Alyssa, for another night. So the police came and they checked out the scene, and what they found was, like I mentioned before, the blood in the bathroom, the body on the floor in the utility room, a 3-foot axe. The axe belonged to the Gores. It was usually kept in the utility room. And she had been hit with the axe 41 times. I believe 28 times in the face. And the medical examiner said she was alive for because it was a safe town, a safe little family type town. But the police knew no drifter is going to swing an axe on a woman 41 times. There's emotion and rage behind that kind of attack. Especially since they had mutilated her face, which usually means they didn't want to see her face. There was something, psychological about that. They also found a bloody thumbprint, I believe, on the freezer, and a rubber sandal mark in the utility room, like rubber sandal mark of blood, like a bloody footprint, I should say, of a size 5 shoe. So that sounds like a woman. And they spoke to Alan for more information. Of course, they suspected him at first. And ultimately, at first he didn't tell them he was having an affair, but ultimately he came clean and he said he was having an affair with Candy Montgomery, but not anymore. The affair was in 1978, and it had ended amicably. But still, they needed to get more information from Candy now, because they knew that she had been there that morning. That much information had already been available to them, and they had spoken to her. She said she went there to get a bathing suit and everything was okay. But now they need to talk to her again. And she denied having anything to do with it, but the evidence was against her. The bloody thumbprint was a match. So she was arrested. And she was released, though, on bail. And she got herself some pretty good lawyers. So the trial was just a few months later. It was in October of 1980. She gave a plea of self-defense. So she came clean that she had done this, but it was in self-defense. And she took the stand and she told her story. And here's how it goes. Now, mind you, this is her story, okay? So, she went to Betty's house for the bathing suit. And Betty confronted her and said, "I know you had an affair with my husband." And she said, "Okay, yes, I did, but not anymore." And Betty was still angry about it. And after a little bit more talking about the topic, to make a long story short, Betty went and got the axe from the utility room. She also did give her the bathing suit and the peppermints. And when she saw the axe, she decided it was time for her to leave. But Betty wouldn't let her go, and next thing you know, they are having this full-blown fight with the axe. And Candy gets the axe away from Betty, and she winds up hitting her with it. And then at some point, Betty says shh to her. I don't know how shh works into this kind of a bloody fight, but Betty said shh to her, she saw, through her lawyers arranged for her to see this hypnotherapist. And the hypnotherapist uncovered this with her. When Betty said, shh, it reminded her on a subconscious level of when she was 4 and she was in the emergency room with her mother because she, Candy, had badly cut herself and she was crying, complaining, and her mother told her to shush. And it was very dramatic. So this reminded her of that. So she went into a dissociative reaction, and that led to her hitting Betty with the axe so many times, 41 times, when in truth you would say, well, why didn't you hit her with it a couple of times and then leave, take off, like, just get her away from you and then go. That's what people would say. Why 41 times? Why did you need to do that? So she says because she dissociated. And it's proven by these doctors, these therapists. Okay. And then, after it was all done, she took a shower there at the house, at Betty's house, which is why there was blood in the bathroom. And she didn't tell anybody about it because she was just so afraid. But this had nothing to do with her wanting Alan, the husband. She says it has nothing to do with that. And she's having an affair with somebody else anyway. So, that was her story. Now, according to Alan, Betty never even knew about the affair. As far as he knew, she never said anything to him. And a few days before the murder, Betty had written a note to her parents where she had mentioned Candy and had called her a, quote, good friend. My good friend Candy. So, there's that. Now, it only took 8 days for this trial to end, and the jury found her not guilty by reason of self-defense. So there you go. Of course, Betty's family was very, very upset with this ruling and did not feel that there was justice. The 2 children, Betty's children, went to the grandparents for custody, to Betty's parents. And the father became estranged. Candy and Pat Montgomery wound up moving away to Georgia right after the trial because the town was not liking them, as you can imagine. And they wound up divorcing a few years later. She wound up getting certified as a family counselor and has kept a very low profile. She has not agreed to do interviews or anything, so we don't know really anything more about her. And that's the whole case. So what do you think? It's a solved crime, but it definitely she thought that this woman was having an affair with her husband, why would she even let her daughter stay there at all? So she had let her stay the night before, and she was letting her stay another night and go swimming. Like, would you let your daughter stay with a woman who had had an affair with your husband? Because I wouldn't. So I don't even know if she ever even confronted her. Like, I'm really wondering. That's the first thing, but we don't know. And why an axe? Why would she come at her with an axe? Now, they're saying that the movie, The Shining, had just come out, and there was an axe in that movie. So maybe that had something to do with the whole axe thing. But even so, like, who attacks somebody with an axe? Who would even think of it? That's not an easy thing to do. I've never even touched an axe, but I see it looks like a heavy thing, you know? So, okay. I mean, she would have really had to been off her rocker to go get an axe and, you know, try to attack this other woman with it. But we knew she had postpartum depression, and who knows how deep that went, so, alright. Now, the thing about the dissociative reaction sounds a little bit out there for a few reasons. First of all, the trauma that she talks about with her mother shushing her. How is that even so traumatic? That's like not that big of a deal. Unless I am missing something there. But I mean, come on. Your mother is shushing you and telling you to be quiet when you're in pain. I mean, yeah, it's not that nice to say to a 4-year-old. You know, to say, oh, you're in a lot of pain, stop crying, everyone doesn't want to hear you cry. That's embarrassing. Like, that memory is gonna send you into a rage. But that's what she said. That's what these hypnotherapists believed. And the court took that, you know, for something. They accepted it. But I don't know. And then, so after she did all that, why didn't she, and she knew it was self-defense. Because, you know, it doesn't even matter. She didn't even need to really explain that much beyond the self-defense, right? Because if somebody swings an axe at you one time, they are threatening your life, and you can defend yourself, right? Like, that already is allowed by the law. So if they threaten you with an axe, and they swing it at you, and you get it away from them, you're not going to be held liable for killing them with that same axe. Am I right? So why bring up this whole dissociative crazy thing? Couldn't she have just said that she was so afraid, out of her mind, she just didn't know what to do? She was, you know, afraid for her life so much so that she just kept swinging it and swinging it and swinging it and swinging it to make sure there was no chance that Betty was going to come back at her. Something like that. But this crazy dissociative reaction. Alright, I've said enough about that. But I do see why she was found innocent. And that's because there doesn't seem to be a clear motive. If the affair was over and she was already having another affair, like, you can't say for sure what really happened, so they can't find her guilty. Like, that's the way I see it. And I think I'm gonna leave it at that. But please share with me your thoughts about the case. Like I said, I don't know what happened here. I really don't. There's definitely something fishy, but I don't know what.